I once thought they were here to save me, until the gun was pointed at my head. I looked into those familiar faces, devoid of any sympathy. Chapter 16, One of Us, Part 1. My suspicions were correct. The group of men and women lead Samuel and me further into the forest, the trees around us growing thicker with every step. The sun was completely gone now, and Margaret had pulled out a flashlight to lead the way. The artificial light sent eerie shadows across our group as the last rays of sun faded away. As we walked, I couldn't help the glares I sent in Margaret's direction, as well as the feelings of hatred for her and those behind me. Almost all of the people I'd met and trusted were somehow here, dragging me through the forest. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nogan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing pursuits, enthusiasm. Zane, Tolai, Enzo. These people were supposed to help, not tie me up and hold a gun to my head. My glares did nothing to stop them though, and we trudged on deeper into the never-ending maze of trees. Before long, I started to notice something flickering ahead. We walked directly towards the motion, almost letting it guide us. Accompanying the sparking shadows was a faint orange glow that seemed to mock the appearance of a sunset. As we advanced, my eyes fell upon a raging fire in the middle of a large clearing. Margaret turned off her flashlight as we approached, the fire giving us all the light we needed. I was continually shoved forward by Tolai as we entered the clearing. I quickly noticed a stone building to the right of us, nearly identical to the one I'd stayed in earlier that day. The only difference being it was larger, much larger. People were pouring out of it, walking towards the fire in small groups. I lost count of them as my head was shoved to the ground, preventing me from examining anything further. Our group made our way to the fire where I was pushed to the ground, falling on my knees. The barrel of the gun finally left my head and I quickly turned to find Samuel. The men were dragging him behind us, moving until they came next to me. They threw him on the ground where he landed in a heap. He tried to lift himself up but only fell further into the dirt. I scanned him once over, gasping when I saw the blood staining almost every inch of the rope that held him bound. The skin was hardly there anymore, and the men hadn't bothered to take out the knife lodged into his arm. When my eyes fell upon his extended legs, I realized the cause for him not walking. 2 large holes rested in each leg, something large and silver glinting from within the skin. Apparently, silver bullets were a thing now. His wretched and unmoving figure drew me towards him, my instinct screaming at me to somehow help him. Before I could move though, 2 arms quickly wrapped around my elbows. I looked behind me only to see an expressionless Zane holding me captive. I fought against his grip, but he only tightened it. My ears registered people murmuring and I quickly glanced around us. A large crowd was now gathered around the fire, each and every person looking straight at Samuel and I. The crowd consisted of men, women, and even children. They all had a knowing look in their eyes, though some seemed to hold a glint of fear as well. Their fear, aimed towards Samuel and me, only fueled my own. "What's going on?" I screamed desperately, my voice coming out much stronger than I felt. Margaret appeared in front of me, suddenly slapping me hard. My face fell to the side with the movement, her hand leaving a burning sensation in place. Samuel snarled loudly, causing a few people to suddenly move away from us. Margaret didn't move, however, keeping her place directly in front of me. She appeared as if she was going to scream in my face before a woman suddenly appeared next to her, placing a long hand on Margaret's shoulder. Margaret relaxed slightly, looking up at the new woman's tall frame. She had short white hair that fell to her shoulders in a plain and straight line. It seemed to ripple with every move she made. Slight wrinkles lined her eyes, a particularly deep one embedding itself in between her brows. As she emerged, people unknowingly seemed to look to her for answers. "What do you want?" Samuel suddenly growled next to me. I looked at him, noticing he was staring at the white-haired woman with recognition. She smiled, cooing, "What we will soon get." Like hell. At his words, the woman quickly raised her hand and then made a brushing motion towards Samuel. Men immediately grabbed him, holding tightly onto the knives embedded in his flesh. Something flashed in his eyes, and I suddenly realized Samuel was as hurt as HED made it seem. He instantly began to fight the men off, sending a few flying dangerously close to the fire. At his actions, I was quickly snatched to my feet and brought in between Margaret and the older woman. Once again, I felt something hard press against my flesh, though this time it was held to my side. "Stop fighting, Wolf," the woman called. Samuel ignored her and started to rip through the rope that held him bound. I watched a few of the strands fall to his side as he raised his fists high. Men slowly started backing away as Samuel's back arched, sending a sickening cracking noise through the air. A woman screamed somewhere, and I noticed several people rushing away from the scene, back into the large house. "If you don't stop, we will have to shoot her," the woman spoke again. Panic coursed through me at her words, the gun suddenly feeling as if it was already cutting through my flesh. However, once the men started rushing Samuel once again, he crouched low to the ground. A newfound strength came into his being as he fought them off, lashing out wildly and finally breaking the last of the rope that held him bound. When no more men came forward, he sneered at the older woman. "I know about you and your little cause. You would let kill one of your own," the woman sighed, motioning something to Margaret. "Sadly, she is not one of us." The next few moments happened slowly. Then all at once, Margaret stiffened beside me. Something clicked into place. A booming noise deafened my ears. Then, pain, more screaming rang through my ears, but this time I realized they were my own. I fell forward and gripped my ribs, my side suddenly feeling as if 100 burning coals were poured over my skin. No one caught me as my body fell limply to the ground, my limbs folding in under around myself. I heard someone screaming my name, but I couldn't register who it was. All I could think was that I was going to die. This was it, and I was never going to make it out. I closed my eyes as black spots danced before my vision. Before I could welcome the darkness, someone was pulling at my face, lightly smacking my cheeks. My eyes shot open at the new sensation as it distracted me from my side for just a moment. I searched my surroundings until my gaze fell on Samuel, who was now directly in front of me. His lips were moving, his face contorted in complete agony. It slowly dawned that he was the one calling my name again and again. He was suddenly ripped from my vision as I felt myself being lifted into the air. I was placed on my feet, though the person holding me supported most of my weight. I slowly lifted my head up, expecting to see Samuel, but it was Margaret that had lifted me off the floor. Confusion poured into me until I saw Samuel placed in front of me, the men holding him down on his knees. Slowly, I noticed my senses were coming back to me, along with the pain growing in my side. Samuel was screaming at the white-haired woman as she adjusted her grey shirt and walked towards him. "Let her go. This doesn't concern her, unless you want the next bullet lodged in her chest. I'd suggest you stay quiet," she spoke monotonously, leaning down to stare in his face. Samuel's chest was quickly rising and falling, puffing out slightly. He shot daggers into the woman's eyes. I tried to watch their encounter without interruption, but all too soon the burning sensation had grown too much to bear. Even with Margaret's strong arms holding me in place, I could hardly stand. My hands were plastered to my side attempting to ease the pain, but they did nothing to help. They only grew wet with what I assumed to be blood running down my body. "What do you want?" Samuel growled. I could hear the smile in the woman's voice as she responded. "Compliance." I felt Samuel's gaze on me once more. I tried to appear strong, tried not to show how much the wound was affecting me. The last thing I wanted was another one of his erupting fits of rage. "Stop her bleeding and I will do what you say." Samuel spoke lowly. "Just don't hurt her. That sounds like a reasonable request. But first, we need you out of the way." Before I knew it, Samuel was being lifted off the ground and pushed forward. The group of men led him around the fire, walking directly by where I half stood. I lifted my gaze to meet Samuel's eyes, but quickly wished I hadn't. They were a flaming red, staring directly into my soul. His face was contorted into worry, his eyes darting constantly to my side. When he was finally out of my sight, I let my gaze down to where he'd been staring. I gasped as I saw the red liquid quickly flowing between my fingers. My breathing quickened and my body tensed. Though I knew it was no time for them, flashbacks of my time with James flew across my mind. This was the same kind of pain. He'd thought if I escaped him I wouldn't have to experience it again. I wouldn't gain any more scars. Clearly, I was wrong. There was no escape. My gaze followed Samuel and the men holding him. They were heading for a spot on the ground that stood out from the rest of the camp, though only a little ways away from the fire and where I now stood. The ground seemed to glisten as the men moved tarps aside, revealing several long silver bars. At this sight, Samuel froze. Margaret tightened her grip on me as the others struggled to push Samuel forward. As they fought, Margaret pushed me forward. I stumbled with the sudden movement, my feet flying out from underneath me. No hands caught me as I fell forward, my shoulder landing painfully on the ground, followed by the rest of my body. I cried out as the burning intensified and now seemed to cover my entire torso. At my cry, Samuel whirled around and began to tear away from his guards. He broke free for a fraction of a second and towards my limp body, but before he could help me he was ripped backward by another 3 men. He fought against them desperately, constantly looking back to me. The woman from before came and pulled me to my knees. My legs struggled to hold my weight and I felt as if I'd be content to die right then and there. The woman called out a few words, but my ears once again didn't comprehend what she was saying. However, I did notice Samuel go rigidly still, allowing the men to shove him closer to the silver bars. I watched them stalk towards the metal, malice lacing their stances. Just as I thought the men would tie Samuel up to burn alive, the bars suddenly opened. They popped upwards like a door, revealing a dark hole underneath. Samuel barely had time to register what was happening before he shot me one last horrified glance and was pushed into the hole. My gaze followed his body as it fell from view. I was still being held up by the woman and Margaret's strong grips. Without them, I knew I would collapse instantly. They seemed to know this as well but made no move to pull away. They moved me back until I stood in front of the fire, the crowd of people staring at me once more. I stared back, though not out of hostility this time. They were human, and they knew I was human. Surely that had to count for something. Surely they had to realize that I'd just been shot, and I needed help. Surely they wouldn't let me die. Surely now that they had Samuel they would let me go. However, my silent pleas were ignored. The eyes just stared back at me as if I was some foreign object they suddenly had the chance to explore. I was suddenly just some strange and new thing that they didn't know what to do with. Margaret's voice suddenly called out to someone and I looked around to see movement in the crowd while people parted to let someone through. My eyes slowly scanned the faces, trying to find who it was they were parting for. When a familiar face came into view though, a new hatred filled my being. As the shape of a man appeared, I used the last of my strength to glare directly into his eyes. This was the person I trusted. This was the person I thought would help me. This was the man who broke down my guard, allowing me to reveal information I wanted to stay hidden. This was the man I could thank for my betrayal. He met my gaze, looking down at me as he made his way to the front. Our eyes never left each other as he moved forward, coming slowly to stand in front of me. The hatred in my eyes didn't cease. He broke our eye contact and looked down at the ground. He hesitated slightly before he knelt down and brought something forward, placing it next to him. The grips on my elbows suddenly left, and I faltered in place. My feet wanted to give out, but I wouldn't let them. I wouldn't show weakness. Cade, however, saw past my facade. He motioned to someone and Margaret suddenly appeared in my vision once more as she swiftly pushed me to my knees. I expected her to leave, but she kept a firm hand on my shoulder as Cade fiddled with what was next to him. Just stop the bleeding, Cade, Margaret voiced. I need to see if the bullet is still in there. If it is, I have to pull it out. I flinched as he brought his hands forward, slowly removing mine from my side. My hands didn't want to comply. as I knew that as soon as they left their position an entirely new wave of pain would hit. Cade, however, was relentless. He pulled my arms away, ignoring my slew of curses directed at him. He ignored me as he peeled away the layers of clothing now matted to my skin with blood. I closed my eyes as the night breeze hit my bare skin, sending it aflame once more. The bullet just grazed her. Oh, wrap it and hopefully, the bleeding will stop. Before I could register his words, a new figure was appearing in my vision. I recognized the white-haired woman immediately. Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without your help. Cade grumbled something in response, my ears not quite catching what he said. My eyes followed his movements as he brought forth gauze and large bandages. Before I could register what he was doing, he began dabbing at my skin with something, sending entirely new waves of agony over me. I let out an involuntary gasp as he plastered countless things over my wound, expertly wrapping the gauze to allow it to stay in place. When he was finally finished, my breathing was ragged and harsh. Has it stopped? The woman's voice sounded. Cade sighed, looking to her and Margaret. Margaret suddenly released her hold on me and walked away, forcing me to stand. I stumbled with the sudden action, but Cade quickly jumped up to steady me. Once I had my footing, I looked for the woman. She was standing right next to Margaret, the pair looking quite triumphant. Is someone going to tell me what the hell is going on? My voice suddenly sounded. It was full of venom and unheard screams. Margaret scrunched her face in disgust while the woman simply smiled. Cade, why don't you inform Samantha? As she put it, what the hell is going on? Cade groaned, almost too quiet for me to hear. Samantha. Turning towards me, his voice completely different from before. There was no humor, no childlike laughter. We've got to put you down there with the wolf. Either you go willingly or forced. I let his words sink in for a moment before I completely lost it. Are you kidding me? I practically screamed in his face. I went to continue, but he quickly cut me off. Listen, Samantha. No, you listen. Cade, I quickly retorted. I don't know what's going on here, but I'm sure as hell not going to be put in a hole and left to die. I was just shot, fuck's sake. You people were supposed to help me get out of here, not literally throw me to the wolves. I breathed heavily in between rants, realizing I now had the attention of every person in the clearing. Normally I would shy away from something like this, but tonight it only fueled my desperate fire. I'm a human. Remember, what threat could I possibly pose? Just let me go and I swear I won't look back. This will be over. I cried out. I was calling out to the sympathies of the onlookers, hoping to gain some sort of compassion. While shouting, I let my eyes rest on Margaret and the woman standing next to her. My eyes narrowed slightly when I saw their smug grins, immediately realizing this was doing me no good. I turned my attention back to Cade, knowing I'd clearly lost the fight. I fucking trusted you. I thought that if you got out of town it'd be okay. I never imagined your mate would be the beta. Finally looking me in the eye. You're with the wolves. Now silence ensued as I let his statement sink in. I'm not his fucking mate. I eventually responded. I'm a human. No matter what you people keep telling yourselves, I am no different from you. I wish that were true. He told me softly. Cade broke his resolve. He looked down to the ground, hair falling over his features. I saw his shoulders rising and falling quickly, and I prayed HB take pity on me. He was the one who got me into this, and he might be my last hope in getting out. All I wanted was to get away so I could help my family. My voice broke, betrayal tears forming in my eyes. Please, just let me go. He hesitated before responding. Samantha, The woman from before suddenly cleared her throat. I whipped my gaze towards her, not bothering to wipe the tears that were now cascading down my cheeks. She ignored me and walked forward to stand next to Cade, placing a hand on his shoulder. Cade, she spoke kindly. That's enough. At her words, Cade stiffened and stood up, without another glance my way. He turned and walked back into the crowd. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, Heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. I screamed as I watched him leave, sending daggers into his back. I hoped he felt everyone. Samantha, that's enough, she started. I whipped my head to face this new woman. Who the hell are you? Danaria born. She smiled proudly, though I noticed it didn't go past her lips. Is that supposed to mean something? Her smile disappeared. I was originally the one who deemed you acceptable to help our cause. It seems I've misjudged. She waved a hand to some men and they emerged, started to force me forward once again. I struggled within their iron grasps, crying out in pain. What is that supposed to mean? What do you want with me? I cried desperately. My resolve was weakening and I realized I would do anything to not be thrown into that hole. Please, I just want to leave. Let me go. She smiled. My pleading cries only got louder as the men picked me up by my elbows and began leading me to the hole. Ignoring the pain coursing through my entire body, I dug my heels into the ground and fought desperately. It did no good. With each second, we got closer to the darkness. There's no point in struggling. Samantha, we've won. The woman's voice rang out once more. I stopped my struggles for just a second as I looked her square in the eyes. Burn in hell. Her face darkened and men pulled me harder. I was brought to the edge of the hole in the ground, where the men paused momentarily. My limbs thrashed wildly, trying to catch onto something that would pull me away from my assailants. The woman's voice pierced the night for the last time. Throw her in. Chapter 17. One of us part to throw her in. I was lifted into the air as the grasp on my arms was suddenly released. The next thing my mind registered was my body free-falling, darkness overcoming my senses. I let out a blood-curdling scream as darkness folded around me. However, the minute the sound left my mouth, I was being enveloped in something other than wax and dirt. Flesh caught hold of my waist as I crashed into another body. The air was knocked out of my lungs as I fell another few feet. I braced myself for the impact of the cold and unforgiving earth, but it never came. I fell on top of Samuel, his back crashing into the ground beneath us. There was a sickening crack at the collision and I felt a whoosh of air as Samuel's lungs emptied. He groaned loudly as dirt and dust flew around us, blinding us both momentarily. We laid there for a moment, both breathing heavily and trying to recover. However, when I realized I was enveloped in Samuel's arms, laying against his naked chest, I quickly pulled away. Fear coursed deep through my veins as my hands felt their way along the dirt floor, searching for something that could get me out. I refused to be stuck. Though my wound was bandaged, I could feel the blood start to flow freely once more. It pushed against and soaked through the gauze as if begging for my attention. However, I forced the sensation out of my mind. My eyes cowled at seeing the darkness that now wrapped around us, so my hands scoured the terrain. They searched for a rock, leaf, anything I could use to help myself escape the situation. But they came up empty again and again. I finally looked upward, a mangled cry escaping my lips. We were at least 10 feet underground. Samantha, Samuel suddenly groaned. I ignored him as I went into a frenzy, clawing at the dirt around me. The blood was falling down my legs now, but I paid it no mind. I knew the minute I stopped fighting it'd be resigned to die in this hole. Samantha, he said a little more forcefully. Again, I ignored him. Damn it. Samantha, stop moving. You're reopening your wound. I waited for him to come and force me to stop, but he never did. Slightly perplexed at his lack of force, I slowly turned to face him. He was laying in the same place as we landed moments ago, unmoving. His breathing was heavy and long, almost as if he was sighing constantly. What are you doing? I asked tentatively. I can't move. I immediately focused all my attention on him, abandoning my hopeless attempt to escape. What? I think the fall broke my spine. My eyes widened. What? He turned his head slightly towards me. Even through the darkness, I could sense his glare. I caught you. I landed wrong. I can't move. His icy voice washed over me. leaving me breathless and panicked. Samuel was angry. Beyond angry. My hands started twitching as my eyes tried to adjust. Without my vision, I was helpless to any attack he was inclined to make. Silence fell for a few minutes as I continued watching Samuel's breathing, trying to gauge his emotions. The silence and lack of movement calmed me slightly, but no matter how much time passed, I was still on the verge of tears. "Are you all right?" Samuel suddenly asked. His voice was softer now, though just barely. "I'm fine," I answered quickly. I was anything but fine. I let out a long breath, trying to pull back the tears. Desperation was starting to sink in, but I knew I couldn't let myself break down. "Not yet. You need to stop moving. Put pressure on your side." I nodded as I brought my hands to my injury, forcing myself to apply a light pressure against the bandages. Painful screams threatened to escape my lips, but I somehow managed to hold them back. I let my legs give out beneath me, my body falling limply against the wall. Samuel let out another long breath. Silence fell between us as my mind tried to wrap around the night's events. It was definitely struggling. I couldn't stop the images of the past few hours from replaying in my mind, allowing myself to feel the hurt and betrayal all over again. Fresh tears formed in my eyes, but I quickly wiped them away. I wouldn't let the bastard see me cry. Samuel grunted as he tried to move, but quickly fell back down again. I watched as he struggled, feeling slightly guilty. However, as soon as I felt the guilt creep in, I immediately pushed it away. I couldn't be soft. I couldn't let his weakness play on my sympathies. If I wanted to get out, I had to be ruthless. So I let my mind wander as I tried to distract myself and control my thoughts. It didn't work. No matter how I tried to act as if I didn't care. Samuel's struggling frame and freshly burnt skin were embedded deep into my thoughts. "Are you okay?" I asked him begrudgingly. He grunted in response and tried shifting his weight again. Unsuccessfully. The guilt made its home in my chest. I hesitated. "Do you need help?" Silence fell for a few agonizing moments. I watched as he squirmed some more, clearly uncomfortable with the fact he wasn't able to move. "A kiss would be nice," he suddenly told me. My eyebrows raised and eyes widened before I heard him chuckle softly. I let out a long huff, any and all forms of pity immediately disappearing. "That's not funny." "I don't know. I'm laughing." He paused before continuing. "I mean, it was pretty one-sided last time." My breathing hitched as I remembered our moment in the brush. "I wonder why." I practically growled. Samuel only laughed. "Yep, me too." I rolled my eyes inside as silence greeted us again. I continued to watch him struggle on the ground until he seemed to give up on moving. An angry breath of air came from his lips as his body fell still. His breath formed in the air as a white cloud, disappearing as soon as it arose. I shuddered at the cold, the burning in my side deciding to grow a little more. Sighing, I realized my body was refusing to forget its wounds to instead relive the night's events again and again. My hand traveled to the clothes matted against my body. Though they had cleaned the wound, the dirt found its way into the crevices of bandage once more. "How is your side?" Samuel seemed to sense my thoughts. "Did they clean it? Wrap it?" I paused, remembering Samuel one condition for compliance, yes. "It just reopened when they tossed me in here." "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." He mumbled. The faintest smile appeared at the corner of my lips. We could agree on something. My anger slowly subsided as we laid in silence once more. It seemed to be my only friend. However, my mind wandered endlessly and soon enough it begged me to stop the deafening noise. All I could think about was the moment I was shot, the never-ending pain. And then, all I could think about was the dismissal and betrayal. I felt myself growing colder by the minute, and I knew I needed my mind away from the incident. So, I said the first thing that came to my mind. I immediately regretted it, as it opened an entire mess of things I didn't want to face. "Thanks for not letting me fall." I could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Anytime." Then, he hesitated as if fighting against his words. You know, I actually do need your help. I watched him try to sit up before his body spasmed, sending a wave of pain through his face. My own body froze in place as I watched. What do you need? I finally breathed when his body fell limp. He was panting heavily but somehow managed to keep a light-hearted tone. My sudden bout of gratitude seemed to do wonders for his mood. There's just some silver bullets in my legs that I need to be taken out. I paused before I practically cried. You want me to take the bullets out? He nodded his head. I would do it. But I can't move. I have to get them out before it starts to heal or else I'm kind of in deep shit. I hesitated once more. Before I could retort or explain to him how I clearly was qualified to do anything he was asking me. It's not hard. Please. I felt my body start to move towards him. Almost out of my own accord. My hands were still pressed into my side, making my movements awkward and slow. He was patient. However, even mumbling for me to be careful as I moved. I eventually reached his side and peeled my hands away from my body, searching the darkness for his injuries. Thigh and knee. He spoke suddenly. I nodded, directing my hands where he told me. The light was all but gone, the fire above ground only casting dark shadows. You could still smell the remnants of the wood as it flickered though, mocking us with its potential light. I held my breath as my hands slowly descended upon his skin, falling just below his knee. Sure enough, I felt broken, swollen, and bleeding skin. My fingers grazed the center of the wound, making Samuel breathe in harshly. I have no idea what I'm doing. Samuel, I half cried, realizing I didn't even know why I was helping him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Just dig it out. He grunted. I let out a half-mangled laugh while my gaze fell once more on the wound. Not letting myself think about it, I carefully took one hand and tried to pry open the hole in his flesh. Samuel gasped at my touch but remained still. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I kept repeating to him as I dug deeper, trying to feel for the bullet. Eventually, I found it, pulled it out, and quickly shoved it into my pocket. You okay? I asked as I listened to his ragged breathing. He let out a careful sigh, though I noticed it trembled slightly. Next one. I mimicked my motions from before, slowly and carefully moving my hand up his other leg. When I found the wound, I noticed this one was larger, causing me to silently thank the heavens. I wouldn't have to pull the skin apart. What I thought would be easier turned out to be just as difficult, if not more. It was harder finding the bullet in his mess of muscle, and I had to dig blindly. Samuel soon started slurring curses under his breath, and I kept repeating my apologies. I was almost ready to pull back when I finally found the bullet. Like before, I pulled it out quickly and tossed it in my pocket. For both our sakes. I hope you never get shot again. Samuel chuckled, remaining in his position, sprawled out on the floor. Trust me, I don't plan on it. Looking over my shaking frame, I could say the same for you. Do you feeling okay? Great. I quickly answered. I felt him try to move again. He was able to lift his head up now, but the other limbs were still unusable. Samantha, I'm so sorry. His voice suddenly cracking. All I could think about was getting you out of there. I never wanted you to get hurt. I never thought they'd actually shoot. It's all right. I cut him off. I'm all right. No, you're not. Stop pretending. My mind reeled to catch up with his quickly changing moods and personalities. One second he was growling at me, and the next his voice was filled with such vulnerability I would think him capable of compassion. I quickly changed the subject. Who was that woman? What did they want? He stiffened again. I silently cursed my brain to mouth filter, wishing not for the first time that it actually worked. There were a dozen more things I could have asked him in order to not make an at me once more. I don't know what to tell you. You obviously already know these people are part of the humans' rebellion. He snarled. If I hadn't have been paying attention, I would have missed the tinge of bitterness that laced his words. All of them? I asked in disbelief, thinking back to the children I saw. All of them? I had no idea. I trailed off. His voice softened slightly, taking in my confusion. They've been trying to find a way to get to the pack for years. Dalmaria is in charge of this group, along with a few others. We haven't done anything about them because they haven't ever been a real threat. They've never been able to actually do anything apart from smuggling people out of town. Normally the blue-eyed pack catches those people. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. His voice darkened. Apparently they missed a few. I hesitated, mentally shrinking away from his new tone of voice. What are you going to do about it? Nothing you should concern yourself with. You'll be safe. I can promise you that. His voice seemed to darken once more. I paused, not liking the sound of the words on my lips. Is your pack coming? I didn't tell them where I was going, but Riley will probably find out soon enough. Why, hell, you really want to know? He asked dubiously. Maybe. I suddenly questioned myself. He laughed once. I didn't want anyone knowing you were out in the woods alone, so I didn't tell anyone where I was going. He paused, seeming to debate continuing with his explanation. As for how he'll find us, werewolves have abilities humans do not. When we are at our wolf form, we can talk to each other through our minds. It comes in handy since wolves can actually talk. I breathed heavily. It heard rumors about this but never knew the full truth. Secondly, we've got pretty great noses. He'll be able to sniff us out if all else fails. I mean, that's how I found you. He trailed off, quoting the next part. Even though you fucking smelled like another man. Someone gave me their jacket. I told him cautiously. He growled more and I winced back, holding my breath. However, he still cowled and moved, so I knew I was safer now. I let the silence stretch for a few minutes as I contemplated what Samuel told me. This is crazy, I eventually whispered, mostly to myself. Samuel caught my thought. Samantha, you've grown up around werewolves. How is this weird? I've tried to avoid them. That's how. That load of good that did you. I ignored his comment, feeling anger slowly rise inside of me. Like usual, it threatened to spill out of my mouth in harsh and accusing statements. However, I tried to ignore it as my body shuddered, the movement hitting my side. I winced slightly before letting silence fall over us, knowing it was better than what I had to say. Tonight was the night to fuel Samuel's fury. I let my thoughts swarm my mind, taking the place of our conversation. Now that my adrenaline was residing, fatigue was starting to overcome me. I pushed it aside as I forced myself to think of ways to escape, as well as involuntarily fret over our situation. How long would we be here? Would they feed us? Would they kill us? Would they let us go? Each question didn't have a very hopeful outcome. Shifting my thoughts, I wistfully reflected back on my family. The likelihood of my mother and brother still being alive was quite slim, but I refused to accept that. I kept telling myself that everything would be all right, even though everything pointed against it. James wouldn't hurt them. They'd be provided for. Will would get better. Lastly, and unwillingly, I let my mind float to the person in front of me. Samuel. Replaying the night's events, I slowly realized everything he did to try and protect us. More specifically, to try and protect me. His actions only confused me as I thought harder, remembering every experience with a werewolf in my past. They didn't care about humans. They cared about themselves. They didn't let others push them around. They killed for what they wanted. It seemed to me that, at least for tonight, Samuel was opposite of every one of those statements. Everything I thought I knew was being challenged, as it was the humans taking on the deadly role I thought Samuel to occupy. The more I thought, the more the cold night started to creep in. I tried not to move too much as I brought my knees to my chest, hugging my body for warmth. It seemed the layers I was wearing weren't doing me much good. Samuel noticed my discomfort and suddenly broke the silence. Are you cold? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Are you not? He laughed quietly. Higher body temperature. Better immune system. I nodded my head, remembering that little fact. As I nodded, Samuel started trying to move once more. I went to stop him as he started sitting up, but he was soon kneeling on the ground in seemingly perfect health. I stared at him in shock, noting how he moved perfectly on his once mangled legs. What the actual foo, didn't anyone ever tell you it's not polite to swear? I glared at him, though I wasn't actually angry. The only thing I could focus on was his standing figure. All memories of his injuries somehow erased. He sauntered over to where I sat, not noticing my stiffness at his approach. Well then, I breathed as he sat next to me, a little too close for comfort. Samuel let out a single laugh. Calm down. You're cold and I can help. I was about to move away from him until I felt his shoulder brush my face. A sudden wound lingering on my skin, but I didn't flinch back. He leaned further into me. He took his hands and found mine, wrapping them tightly together with his. Is that better? I shivered again, this time as the cold started to leave. I didn't want to encourage Samuel's close proximity, but I couldn't help but appreciate his warmth. To my agent extraordinaire,丨Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. Just don't come any closer. I paused. Anytime. We stayed like that for a few minutes. I relished in his warmth as he lined himself up against my body. It feared that he would attempt to pull me into him, but he seemed to have completely innocent intents. To my agent extraordinaire,丨Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. I still found that hard to believe. I've got a proposition. He spoke slowly. What sort of proposition? I narrowed my eyes. Nothing bad. He quickly answered. But I need to talk to Riley and I also don't want you to get cold tonight. I was thinking if I shifted then both problems would be solved. I hesitated, but he seemed to anticipate my reaction. I can promise you we'd both be really warm, he persuaded. I thought you didn't get cold. I questioned, suspiciously. He laughed. I don't. But a little cuddling never ceases to warm the heart. I choked on my spit, scoffing. Did you really just say that? His answer seemed to elicit the response that he wanted, as I noticed a smile spread across his face. He tried to nonchalantly shrug his shoulders, but I could see the laughter under the surface. Maybe. He spoke lightly. Silence stretched once again as he awaited my answer. I thought over his so-called proposition and realized he was probably right. If I didn't want to wake up with hypothermia, this was the best option. Still, a knees tugged at my heart. Just sleeping. Just for warmth. I quietly questioned. Just sleeping. He chuckled. What are you going to say to Riley? He thought for a moment. Well, I need to tell him what's happening. It's just probably freaking out. If I tell him then he can come and help us get back home. I froze in place. The last thing I wanted was the lunatic alpha forcing me back into town. You know, I actually think he'll be fine. You just stay human. To my agent extraordinaire,丨Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. I started to move away from him, pulling back my hands from his grasp. He didn't stop me, but a sharp burning sensation erupted on my side once again, causing me to fall back against the wall. I gasped in pain as his hands quickly darted to my side, lifting my shirt up slightly to see the bandaging. Samuel cursed under his breath as I sat as still as possible. However, each breath sent another wave of pain through my body, making it hard to focus on anything else. Samuel stayed frozen by my side as we both waited for the burning to subside. It seemed to take hours, but eventually, it turned into a dull ache, when my breathing became regular again and my figure relaxed. He hesitantly spoke. Samantha. I'm fine. I breathed. I felt his shoulders sag. No, you're not. I didn't answer him, knowing he could see right through me. You need to sleep. If I shift then you can sleep against me and I won't have to worry about you all night. Stubbornness had crept into my mind and I refused to answer. There was no way I was enabling him to call another dozen werewolves to rescue us. I'd make it out on my own. Once I was out of the hole I was determined to keep running. And I couldn't do that if an entire pack showed up. Samuel sighed. What if I didn't talk to Riley? What? The last thing I want is for you to get worse. So I'll level with you. If I can shift then I won't call Riley. I was taken aback by his words. This was an entirely new Samuel that sat next to me. He wasn't forcing my hand, insulting me, or threatening me. For once he seemed like a normal human being. I unknowingly nodded at his words, at which he let another smile plaster his face. He peeled away from me and moved to the other edge of our hole. I tried to watch his movements, but the darkness swallowed him completely. Before long I heard several cracking noises, followed by Samuel's soft grunting. I closed my eyes as I imagined what was happening, recalling the times I'd seen werewolves shift. It was anything but pretty. Seconds later, the noises stopped. I carefully opened my eyes only to see a large blonde wolf tentatively walking towards me. I held my breath as the animal approached, taking in just how large the thing was. I'd seen Samuel's wolf before, but now that I was injured and 10 feet underground, he seemed much more intimidating. The creature noticed my stiff frame and stopped in the middle of our makeshift room. It breathed evenly as I gathered my thoughts, willing myself to breathe again. Samuel, I hesitantly called. The wolf whined in response. My shoulders fell and relaxed slightly, urging the wolf to come forward again. It wagged its tail lightly before continuing its approach. It only took another few steps until the thing was right next to me, sitting down where Samuel once was. I felt thick for brush against me as the creature circled before laying against the wall. It rested its head on my lap and stared up at me with bright red eyes. I shook my head in disbelief, recognizing those eyes immediately. This is so weird. The wolf huffed and moved its head, gesturing for me to move into him. I complied and slowly started moving away from the wall, careful not to move my side too much. The task was much easier said than done, as it seemed every inch I moved I had to stop and wait for the pain to subside. The wolf was patient with me as it placed its head behind my back, gently nudging me forward so he could slip behind me. By the time he was resting behind me, I leaned against him. I felt as if I couldn't move another inch. I was breathing heavily once more, guns resting firmly above my hip. I didn't notice myself sink further into fur as I breathed, allowing my body to finally and fully relax. When my heart rate eventually calmed, I opened my eyes to stare at the wolf. The two of us seemed to take up the entire hole, the wolf almost reaching both ends laying down. I leaned my head back as warmth started to surround me, welcoming it gratefully. My head turned to the side as I watched the wolf gaze back at me. I let out a breath of air as our eyes made contact. I don't think he'll ever get used to this. The wolf gently reached his head up, curling himself further into a ball and wrapping me into his long legs. Before I could adjust my body, I felt a large chunk sliding along my hands. My eyes darted to where they rested, watching the wolf's head retreat slightly. I looked into its eyes once more, rolling my own. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. As if in response, the wolf suddenly touched his nose against my cheek and licked once more. I groaned, removing a hand from my injury to wipe off his slobber. You're disgusting. The wolf whined and seemed to grin as he opened his mouth slightly. I let out a hesitant laugh, shaking my head and burrowing myself deeper into his fur. At my movement, the wolf laid his head down next to my torso. I hesitantly brought my hand forward, placing it lightly on the wolf's head. He stiffened for just a moment before melting into my touch, sighing heavily. You really are just a big dog, huh? My question elicited a large sigh and playful growl, confirming what he'd just stated. My hand lingered on his head as I closed my eyes, listening to his deep breathing. Before long, I let the sound lull me into sleep. Chapter 18. Fire. I was running. Forests surrounded me, each tree and branch growing ever closer. The limbs threatened to swallow me while the ground pulled me deeper into its grasp. Eyes loomed on every side of me, peering through the thick brush to watch me struggle. Something was behind me. I knew what it was just by the sound of its running. The paws landed one after the other, and they were quickly gaining on my failing pace. Snarls ripped through the trees as the wolf teamed up with the elements of the forest to send my heart into a frenzy. I was panicking. The panic caused me to look behind me, over my shoulder. However, the moment I did, I was swallowed by the forest. The trees turned into bushes as their twigs and vines forced me to the ground. I felt a sad and burning erupt from my limbs as they tied around my entire body. I screamed as I realized each and every twig, leaf, and speck of dirt was blazing in a never-ending fire. The fire was encompassing my body, slowly seeping into my skin. It inched and burned until my skin started melting into the flames. Scream after terrified scream escaped my lips until every inch of me was burning, my cries doing nothing to douse the torturous inferno. Then, suddenly, it was gone. The forest left me alone in the middle of a clearing. My breathing was heavy as I cautiously stood, looking around in each direction. I thought I was finally safe until my gaze fell upon a dark figure lurking just beyond the tree line. Something in me recognized the figure, though their identity remained hidden. "Hello," I tentatively called out. My voice echoed the field. Slowly, the figure started to emerge. I quickly recognized that it was a woman. Long, chestnut hair fell across the woman's lengthy torso while blue eyes stared intently into my own. My breath caught in my chest as I realized who this woman was. Mom. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Running quickly to her, I crashed into my mother's frame, sending us both staggering a few paces back. My arms wrapped around her shoulders as I buried my face into her neck, sobs flowing freely from my lips. However, as I held her closer, I realized her body was stiffened and moving. "Mom, what's wrong?" Finally pulling back and getting a look at her face. It was filled with rage. As my arms left her side, I felt something cold swipe along my waist. I took a step back, only to realize she had done the same. Her body was rigid as she stepped away from me, one arm slowly and deliberately raising to my chest. My heart seemed to stop beating as a gun appeared in her hand. "What are you doing?" To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Slowly backing away. "You failed me, Samantha," she spoke monotonously. I slowly started backing away, raising my palms in surrender. As I did, my back fell into something solid. I quickly spun around only to see another taunting figure looming down on me. I realized I recognized this figure. To James. "You've made a terrible mistake," he suddenly whispered in my ear. "You must face the consequences." I tried to run, but he quickly grabbed a hold of my elbows as his hand traced specific letters in the small of my back. I knew it was coming, so it didn't surprise me when something was viciously plunged deep into my back. I cried out as James laughed, pushing me to the ground. I could almost see the knife he held as he anchored his body on mine and carved letters into my skin. The blade dug deeper and cut harsher with each flick of his wrist. I was screaming uncontrollably now, begging for mercy I knew I would never find. In the midst of my screaming, I felt something around me shift. I lifted my head only to be greeted with a circle of people surrounding my broken and bleeding body. They each held a small gun in their hands, pointed directly at me. I tried to stand and run, but one of the people came forward and pushed me back down. I recognized the aged face and white hair before the woman even spoke. "You're not one of us. Delmarie's pet. Let me go," I desperately screamed. "You're with them now," my mother voiced. She walked up with James while my brother, Will, suddenly appeared next to them. I swear I'm not. Looking into each of their eyes. "Cade," Margaret suddenly called as she stepped forward, her face contorted in disgust. Cade abruptly appeared, walking out from behind Margaret. He didn't speak, only raised his arm like the others before him. I stared in horror as he clicked his gun into place and came to kneel in front of me. His eyes were devoid of life and emotion, and he pressed a barrel to my temple. I waited for him to say his last words, but they never came. He pulled the trigger. I gasped loudly as my eyes flew open, the sound of a gunshot still ringing in my ears. A mangled scream came to the back of my throat, but only pieces of it left my mouth. The resulting noise sounded as if I was being strangled. My body shot upright, my arms reaching out to my sides. I felt surrounded by something warm and soft, but the forearm sensation sent me into a frenzy. My legs kicked at whatever wrapped around them as I tried to get on my knees and crawl away. At my harsh movements, a low growl sounded behind me. This only forced my limbs to thrash once more, finally breaking free of whatever held them bound. As I tore away, something shifted behind me as hot breath suddenly fanned across my neck. I slowly looked over my shoulder, my eyes landing on a large blonde wolf. I screamed again, this time the sound piercing the morning light. The wolf seemed to wince before jumping to its feet, sending me stumbling forward. I used the momentum to quickly scurry to the wall farthest from the animal, my breathing quickening with each movement. The wolf noticed me moving away and deliberately stepped towards my shaking frame. I started to hyperventilate as it came closer, each step placed carefully one after the other. I stared the creature straight in the eye, waiting for the moment it would tear me apart. A growl erupted from in front of me and I screamed once more. However, an attack never came. It seemed that hours passed as I waited for teeth to sink into my skin, but it was sharp fangs that finally greeted me. "Samantha," a familiar voice sounded across the room. I glanced up only to see Samuel standing a few feet away. Samuel." His shoulders relaxed as he rushed to my side. I flinched at his quick movements, but he didn't notice. I was soon enveloped in his arms and pressed against his chest. I fought his grip, but he didn't move. The space around me seemed to shrink smaller and smaller until I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. The ground was swallowing me whole. I buried my head as I waited for the earth to come crashing down to finally, and mercifully, kill me. "Samantha, what's wrong?" A faraway voice sounded. My breaths came out ragged and rushed as I tried to focus on the voice. Each moment that passed seemed like a lifetime until I finally realized that the walls were coming down to crush me. Fresh tears started falling down my cheeks as I tentatively cracked open my eyes. As I did, a burning sensation filled my being. Images of flames and guns flashed through my mind, causing me to cry out desperately. I started frantically clawing at whatever force held me bound, screaming for an escape. "Samantha, calm down," the voice attempted to soothe. "You're safe." The words were repeated as images pierced my mind once more, refusing to leave. I tried to focus on the soothing sounds of the phrase when I felt myself being slowly rocked back and forth. I stopped fighting and let the sensation overcome my senses. After what seemed like hours, my breathing finally calmed. Tears still fell out of my eyes, but I didn't think those would ever stop. The voice sounded again, but this time I fully recognized it as Samuel's. "Are you all right?" I slowly nodded, not opening my eyes and keeping my rigid position. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "What happened?" I took a deep breath, forcing the nightmarish images away when they tried to resurface. "Dream." I felt him nod, his head moving on my own. He slowly peeled away from me, allowing me to sit on the ground. He stayed next to my side though, a hand resting across my legs. Although I knew he was waiting for me to speak, I stayed quiet. I was still busy fighting off the demons. "Do you want to talk about it?" He seemed lost. I quickly shook my head. That was the last thing I wanted. He suddenly moved and I opened my eyes slightly to watch what he was doing, sending me a small smile. He quickly stood up and went to the center of the room. He bent down and picked something up before slowly crawling back towards me. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. This will help." He held up a large bottle of water, placing it lightly in my hands. I stared at it for a minute until my body automatically untwisted the lid and brought the liquid to my mouth. It was cool as it ran down my throat, reviving me just a little bit. "Thank you," I whispered to Samuel, taking a small drink himself. "Anytime." I wrapped my arms around myself and started to bring my knees to my chest. As I did so, another burning sensation erupted on my side. I gasped as I forced my legs back down, reaching to put out the flame. The nightmare resurfaced as I suddenly felt thousands of vines and leaves holding me down, the flame slowly eating away at my skin once more. Samuel was at my side in the next instant. As my breathing and heart rate increased, he held me close to his side, trying not to move my body. You're all right. You're safe," he spoke softly. I nodded my head, willing my heart to believe his words. Reality was slowly coming back to me, and I knew it was plants or trees that were causing the flames to erupt in my side. Memories of the previous days replaced the nightmares. Everything slowly started to make sense. I was shot. Samuel nodded, continuing his rocking motion. The image of Margaret pulling the trigger filled my mind. "She fucking shot me," I suddenly exclaimed, rage filling my body. Samuel paused, looking down at me. He laughed slightly, taking my change in demeanor in elegant stride. "You're a bitch." I huffed as his arms fell from my shoulders to settle on my leg. I tried not to flinch away or scream at him, as I knew he was the person to be upset with. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." HED just brought me back from the edge of a breakdown. "Thanks again," I voiced for what seemed to be the 1000th time. He nodded, waving his hand in the air. "Do you want to talk about it now?" "I've heard it helps." "Not really. I mean, it was just a nightmare. An extremely vivid nightmare." My hand involuntarily flinched to my side, then to my back. The nightmare wasn't entirely a dream. "Okay, well, we should probably change your bandages then." I looked at him in confusion. "With what?" He half stood and leaned forward, crawling once again to the center of the room. When he returned, he held a new roll of white gauze. All I could do was stare at it, confused. "But why, they probably know if you get sick it'll kill them all." I let out a quick breath though. Samuel chuckled lightly. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Let me see your side." I winced as I pulled the multiple layers of clothing, revealing the bloodied bandages. After poking around my skin and clothing for a minute, Samuel sighed. "Let's take off your jackets." Before I could object, he was lifting my arms and pulling the jackets over my head. He placed my own next to me while throwing cordess across the room. I watched it land in a heap, dirt flying around it. A small smirk played on my lips. Samuel noticed and rolled his eyes, growling slightly. Would I get a hold of him? I quickly cut him off. He was trying to help me. If it was for his jacket, I would have been a lot colder at night. Samuel glared at me. "If it was for that jacket, I would have found you a lot faster too." I broke eye contact and looked instead to the bandages on my side. Though I had 1,000 things I wanted to say, I bit my tongue. I knew that now was the time to argue. Samuel caught my drift and breathed heavily, pausing for a moment. When he did, I lifted the corner of my shirt to reveal my wound. However, Samuel abruptly took my hand off the shirt and replaced it with his own. He began to fold the material upwards, giving view to my entire stomach. I uncomfortably tried to pull the shirt down, but he anticipated my moves and grabbed my hands. "This is going to make it a lot easier," he told me. I nodded as he let my hands go. They still itched to cover myself, but I held back. The sooner this was over, the better. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I need you to move off the wall." I slowly did as I was told. Now that my back was resting against the hard surface, I felt the weight of my torso fall to my side. It rested against my wound and the fire blazed once more. I stood still as Samuel looked me over, fingers grazing across the gauze that wrapped around my lower half. The blood is dried and sticking to the gauze. I'm going to have to pour some water over it. I nodded as he turned away, coming back with the water we'd drank from earlier. Before pouring it over me, though, he started tearing the gauze from my unharmed skin. He tore the front part at the corners, as close as he could to the actual wound, when he moved around to my back. However, "What is this?" he suddenly asked. I looked at him, perplexed until I saw where his hand was hovering, just over the small of my back. Realization dawned as my nightmare flashed through my mind once more. I quickly brought my hand to my back and started rolling my shirt back down. "It's nothing. How is my side?" I tried to distract him. Samuel shook his head, catching my shirt as it fell. He quickly pinned it back up and scooted me forward a bit more, providing him a clear view of my back. I struggled against his hands that now held mine in place, preventing them from hiding what I knew he was staring at. "Samantha, what is this?" "It's nothing," I repeated. I bent my head, breathing heavily. I knew he'd seen the scars, but I was still in denial. This was something I was ready to face or discuss. I suddenly felt his warm fingers against my skin. I flinched away from his touch, but his hand moved with me. He was trying to decipher what those lines and scars formed. I only prayed he wouldn't. "To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." My prayers were never heard. A tear escaped my eye as he pushed me forward again, bringing my back into the light. His hand traced a particular spot and I shuddered. He paused his movements, looking into my eyes, waiting. He wanted an explanation. My breath shaking. James was really drunk. I made him mad. "It's nothing. Really." I trailed off when I felt him stiffen. "Your stepfather did this?" he asked darkly. I hesitated before I begrudgingly nodded my head. There was no going back now. "It was a few weeks before I met you. To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Now Samuel growled, tracing the lines once again. I knew the spot he was focusing on, as it was the worst of the wounds inflicted. James wanted to make sure his work would never fade, so I dug the knife deeper than I thought possible. The result: his name would forever be a scar on my skin. I turned my head to look at Samuel's face, trying to gauge his reaction. I knew his overprotective nature all too well. If wearing another man's jacket set him off, I was sure what having a name brandished on my skin would do. His face was scrunched up tightly, his eyes staring at the same spot on my back. The rest of his body was deathly still, and if I didn't see him breathing, I would have thought him dead. "Please say something," I pleaded. Samuel pulled back his lips in an animalistic snarl. "I'm going to kill him." I flinched away, my breathing catching in my throat. He didn't stop me as I pushed myself against the wall, bringing my shirt back down. I carefully watched him as his body tensed, remaining in the same unmoving position. His hand was still held out where my back had been, though it was now a tight fist. For the next few minutes, I didn't dare move, speak, or even breathe. I was sure what to make of his words, and right now, I couldn't process them. All I could focus on was his unmoving frame that seemed to tremble with each breath he took. A few times I would notice his eyes turn a bright red as large claws formed on his hands. His back arched slightly once or twice, but Samuel forced himself to stay upright. Agonizing minutes that seemed as long as hours passed by. The situation never changing. Samuel was hanging on by a thread. Eventually, distant voices and movements were heard from above. I raised my head to the clearing above us, noticing the rays of sunrise were now replaced with a harsh noon light. I couldn't make out what the voices were saying, nor how far away they were, but the noises seemed to snap Samuel back into reality. He looked upwards then to me and sighed, bowing his head slightly. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "Just don't leave me again."